wonder why it was that they never let me out. That's all I used to think. Why was I locked up for all them years? I wanted to be a footballer or cricketer. Never got the chance.
When we were put away, and when I got there, and when I seen the nurses, I thought, what am I here for? There's nothing wrong with me. We shouldn't have never been there.
Wasn't anything of our fault, like, you know. It was really my dad, really, like, you know, who got put away.
But what angers me, and I do get angry, raging and thinking of the power they have to do this to you. The fact that you know it's wrong, but there's no redress. And after all, you are sick. I have been in the system for 50 years, but let me tell you, there are many, many more like me.
In 1993, our mental hospitals are closing. But turn back the clock and a shocking fact emerges. Thousands of patients should never have been there.
We used to look at them on the ward and see how well they were coping and wonder why. What are they doing here? Why have they been in all these years? It was just something that you accepted, just something that happened, and I don't know why we didn't question it. I don't know.
Asylums like Stanley Royd in Wakefield are at the end of an era spanning almost 200 years. An era when all sorts of people were defined as mentally deficient and often locked away for lifetimes. Among them were many thousands who suffered no mental illness, but the system didn't notice.
I suppose you can go back to the 1920s and the century before that, when people were very judgmental on why people came into a hospital like Stanley Royd. The judgment was made by society, the judgment was made by families, the judgment might have even been made by legal professions. I would have thought something like 30% of our population slipped through the net, either because of a wrongful diagnosis, if such a thing existed in the early parts of the century, or simply because people wanted to see them locked away and not to have a constant reminder of bad behaviour.
If 30% of Britain's asylum population slipped through the net earlier this century, then some 40,000 people were wrongly locked away.
And once they were inside, they were labelled and you were insane. You were in an asylum, therefore you must be insane if you were in an asylum.
We can quite easily find endless numbers of people who have spent 5, 10, 20, 30 and more years living in situations that none of us would accept for ourselves. People were in fact popped into hospitals for all sorts of strange things. Women who had illegitimate children were popped into hospital and called moral defectives. People who had limited ability, people who had physical disabilities, just popped into hospitals, and out of sight, out of mind, tended to be forgotten.
Tea at the Deaf Club in Leeds. Geoffrey Abbott, who's profoundly deaf, has become a regular helper in the years since he left hospital. Deafness was once a common reason for locking people up.
I would think you'd probably find in most of the major, fairly secure hospitals throughout the country, there would be 1 or 2 examples of profoundly deaf people who had found their way in there with no good reason.
Martin Smith set about finding people who'd been wrongly locked up.
I went to Meanwood Park and said to the medical superintendent, could I please look at the deaf people who are here? The staff in the hospitals broke out from the villas in a very kind of primitive way, people that they thought were deaf. So out came this sort of stream of people who, about 24, 25 people, who the hospital staff thought were deaf, and Geoffrey was one of them.
Geoffrey has never had a mental disability. His family sent him to Meanwood Park Mental Hospital in Leeds because they couldn't cope with his deafness. He didn't get out again for 22 years.
It was at Meanwood. Why were you there? Oh, well, it wasn't my fault. It was my father signed a paper and put me away. And put me into hospital. He just signed it. Well, this hearing man just put me in hospital, and it was my father's fault. It was my father who was bad. It was wrong. Well, I didn't communicate. I didn't talk to them. It was full of hearing people, and I was, by myself. And there were like warders there with keys that locked things up. And I really had to be quite patient. I think it's a tragedy. I mean, if you look at somebody like Geoffrey with all his skills and his wonderful personality, which has maintained itself through those 22 long years, you can think of so many lives that have been wasted.
Oh, don't panic.
John Sylvester wasted 66 years in the system. His nightmare began when he was 6.
Not very old, because my dad came from the army, and my mother was alive then, and she died the 8th of January 1918. Shake hands. Kiss a kiss, come on.
John's father gave his 2 youngest children to Nantwich Workhouse. His sister Phoebe went first. John's long journey through institution and asylum began when a receiving officer collected him in the basket of his push bike.
It was a oblong basket. Wasn't round. I could just fit my bottom in it, you see. I said, I want to turn around and see where I'm going. Oh, we said, we're not going that way, we're going that way, see. I know he gets through the workhouse. And they gave me a bath when I got there. Looked after me.
He was taken into a hospital as a child of 6. John spent the greater part of his 70 years and 10 in isolated and remote institutions, and he lost complete contact with his relatives for a greater part of his life. Even though he and his sister were living in the same institution at one time, contact wasn't allowed.
No, I didn't know much of my father. He used to drink a lot. I could smell it on him. So he wanted to get rid of Buck. Well, he got rid of Phoebe first, and then he got rid of me. I did miss home, going to see my own people. And, being there so many months, I got used to it. I did about 5 years there, getting on for 5 years. In September 15th, I was moved to Storthes Park. I didn't know where I was going.
Stoke Park Colony for mental defectives was 100 miles away near Bristol. It was 1926. John was not mentally ill. He'd lost his family. He was 12.
It was in the winter, very cold. And her sister come, started to cry. Didn't cry long, so I said, dry your eyes. So she said, come on, come follow me. So I followed her, see. She said, what a great big dormitory it was. She said, that'll be your bed.